This is my concluding introduction to how we wrapped up the whole event. And it is my concern somewhat that we have heard so much that it's going to be hard to understand what we've all heard.
Я немножко думаю, переживаю о том, что мы уже так много всего услышали, что в конечном счете будет сложно понять и все вместе сложить.
So I'm going to do a little bit of summary.
Поэтому я хочу сделать небольшой итог,
But from a little different perspective.
но немножко с другой точки зрения.
You know, there are very few times in history
Вы знаете, есть очень немного времен в истории,
where a people or a nation
когда народ или нация
have an opportunity to change their direction.
имеют возможность менять свое общее направление движения.
I believe Ukraine, though, is at that time.
И я верю в то, что Украина как раз вот в такой редкий момент находится.
America was at that time over 200 years ago.
Америка имела такую возможность больше, чем 200 лет тому назад.
There was a man named William Penn
Был человек по имени Уильям Пенн,
who came from England.
который приехал с Англии,
King Charles II gave him what is now Pennsylvania.
и король Чарльз II подарил ему землю, которая сейчас является штатом Пенсильвания.
As a payment for a debt owed his father by the king.
И этот участок земли, это был плата за долг, который у царя был перед отцом Уильяма Пенна.
It's 1/20th the size of Ukraine.
И это 1/20 территории Украины занимает штат Пенсильвания.
But William Penn had the ability to even become king if he wanted to be.
Но у Уильяма Пенна была бы возможность стать даже царем, если ему сильно захотелось бы.
The king gave him the ability to raise taxes and appoint officials.
Царь дал ему возможность, право поднимать налоги и определять официальных лиц.
That William Penn had suffered religious persecution in England.
Но в Англии Уильям Пенн пережил религиозное гонение.
So he said, we will start something new with God's help in the new world.
И поэтому он решил, что в новом мире, он сказал, в новом мире с Божьей помощью мы начнем новую страну, что-то новое построим.
He knew history.
Он знал историю,
He knew the Bible.
он знал Библию.
And he had what most people never have.
И у него было то, что у большинства людей никогда нет.
Was an opportunity to start something new.
Это возможность начать что-то новое, какую-то новую формацию.
He wrote out what is called the frame of government.
И он написал такой труд, который называется «Основы правления».
And in the preface, the beginning of that,
И в вступлении к этому документу
he lays out what I believe to be three essential elements.
он излагает то, что я называю 3 главных элемента.
And then 10 basic truths.
И также 10 базовых истин он указывает,
That are universal.
которые остаются универсальными.
I think they will tie together much of what we have said.
И они во многом связаны с тем, о чем мы говорим в эти дни.
And you'll find them applicable
И
to you
вы
today.
обнаружите, что они достаточно будут отзываться и в ваших сердцах на сегодняшний день.
First, establish a vision.
Первый шаг, который он определил, это определись своим видением, утверди видение.
We must think bigger than ourselves at the moment.
В данный момент нам нужно думать намного шире, чем наш собственный мир.
What would we like to see for the next generation?
Чего бы мы хотели достичь для следующего поколения?
Not just for today.
Думать не только о сегодняшнем дне.
William Penn established a vision.
И Уильям Пенн определил видение для колонии этой.
He said this,
Он сказал следующее.
that there may be room there for such a holy experiment.
А почему бы не допустить, что вполне есть возможность провести такой святой эксперимент?
For the nations of the world want a precedent.
Поскольку народам мира хочется иметь перед глазами прецедент.
And my God will make it
И мой Бог сделает это.
the seed of a new nation.
Он сделает это семенем нового народа.
That an example
Чтобы он стал примером,
may be set up for all the nations.
который будет стоять перед глазами всех остальных народов.
That we may do that which is truly right and just.
И чтобы здесь мы делали то, что является истинным, правильным и справедливым.
That prayer
И вот такая молитва,
wraps the rotunda in our capital
она сейчас, эта молитва, она записана вдоль ротонды нашего Капитоля,
for everybody to remember
чтобы все знали,
that what we have
что то, что у нас есть,
came from a prayer of a righteous man.
пришло от молитвы праведного человека.
It was an experiment
А изначально это был эксперимент.
because it hadn't happened before.
Он так назывался, потому что ничего подобного ранее не делали.
And it was holy
И он назывался святым экспериментом,
because he expected God to bless it.
потому что было ожидание, что Бог его благословит.
The second must establish a goal.
Второй шаг, о котором он говорил, что нужно определиться с целью.
What do we want to see?
Что мы хотим увидеть?
The goal was self-government under God.
И цель создания этой колонии это было, чтобы было самоуправление под присмотром Бога.
Is it possible that a new nation
Возможно ли, чтобы новый народ
could actually be self-governed,
действительно мог находиться в самоуправлении,
where people submitted themselves to God's law?
благодаря тому, что каждый человек будет подчинять себя закону Божьему?
That was his goal.
Вот такая была цель.
And the third is establish the authority.
И третье, что он определял, это утверди власть.
God hates rebellion.
Бог ненавидит восстание.
We must all operate under authority.
Нам всем нужно действовать под властью.
He operated under his authority.
Он действовал под его властью.
The king had said, you can do what you want.
Царь ему сказал, Уильяму сказал, ты можешь делать все, что хочешь на том участке земли.
His choice was to do what God said.
И получив такое право, он выбрал сделать то, что сказал Бог.
So God could bless.
Для того, чтобы Бог это мог благословить.
There are 10 truths
И он указал на 10 истин,
or principles to be understood.
или другими словами, принципов, которые необходимо понимать.
That is in this preface that he wrote.
И это все указано в предисловии к документу, который называется «Основы правления».
And unfortunately, it did not get translated for you. I wanted you to have it.
И, к сожалению, у нас нет этих материалов переведенных, потому что мне бы очень хотелось, чтобы у вас все-таки было перед глазами.
We will somehow get it to you.
Ну, каким-то образом мы постараемся, чтобы вы получили эти материалы в дальнейшем.
But he said these things.
Но он сказал вот такие вещи.
First principle to understand
Первый принцип, который необходимо понимать,
is that God is sovereign.
это то, что Бог Всевышний Владыка.
Understand the nature and the role of God.
И чтобы было понимание природы и роли Бога.
We have heard it many times.
Мы слышали это много раз.
God is creator.
Бог Творец.
He is the sustainer of all life.
Он поддерживает существование всего живого.
Jesus Christ is the supreme authority,
Иисус Христос – верховная власть,
the King of Kings,
Царь царей,
having his authority from God the Father.
поскольку он получил свою власть от Бога Отца.
He rules over all nations.
Он царствует над всеми народами.
That God created man as his highest creation.
Также нужно понимать, в это входит, что Бог создал человека как венец своего творения.
And gave him a duty to oversee his creation.
И Бог взял на себя обязанность присматривать за своим творением.
And God equipped humans
И Бог снаряжает людей
with the abilities and the talents to do the job that he called them to do.
способностью и талантами исполнять ту работу, те задания, которые Бог им поручает.
And understanding the nature and the rule of God,
И в понимании вот этого пункта, что естества и правления Бога,
we understand that God rules through nations.
мы понимаем, что Бог правит над народами, через народы.
William Penn did not know what God's will was for this new potential nation.
Уильям Пенн не знал, в чем была Божья воля для этого нового потенциального народа, когда он только начинал.
But he knew that if he did God's will, God's way, God would bless.
Но он знал, что если мы начнем исполнять Божью волю Божьими путями, то Бог дальше благословит.
We don't know God's sovereign will for Ukraine.
Мы не имеем полного откровения о Божьей суверенной воле для Украины.
I can't tell you God's sovereign will for where America will be 10 years from now.
И я не могу вам сказать Божью суверенную волю на Америку, какой она будет через 10 лет.
but I do know what we need to do.
Но я, по крайней мере, знаю, что нам необходимо делать.
So from there, then I proceeded to go down through and identify the remaining 9 principles that you can find in William Penn's frame of government. If you've never read that, his frame of government is 1682. You ought to do it. Because within that, what he laid out was really the foundation for what became the Declaration of Independence, the precepts that came out of that, and was contained in our Constitution. William Penn laid that down. We don't often think of that in those terms, but Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson both viewed William Penn as the father of our founders. Penn had these principles, and it was what was followed by those who came after them. And I won't go through all of them, but I will tell you that there are 9 others, and I'll just tell you the top of them. First one is understand the nature and the role of God. The second, understand the nature of man. Penn understood that man is not naturally good. He gravitates to that which is evil, into tyranny. And you have to govern yourselves according to God's law. Third, understand the purpose for government. What's it there for? Number 4, understand the purpose for law. Why do we have laws? What are laws supposed to do? They understood that. Understand the natural tendency of government. And that is to consolidate itself and take power away from the people. They understood that principle. Number 6, understand the components of biblical justice. The purpose of government is to enact justice, but what's that look like? What's that based on? Truth and mercy and equity is what it's based on. Where do we get that from? Mosaic law. Number 7, understand the need for maintaining a republic. Citizens' duty. We have a duty. We have a duty, if the power is in the people, we have a duty to maintain the republic, which is why Franklin said to the lady in Philadelphia, you have a republic, if you can keep it, there is a duty to the people. If we don't do what we need to do, we will lose it. Founders knew it. Penn talked about it. It's a biblical principle. Number 8, understand the need to build in safeguards within the system. That's where I get the idea of checks and balances and accountability. It's critical, biblical principle. He had it in his preface. Number 9, understand the need to teach the youth, which is why Penn said you could not, if this thing ever came about, you could not maintain it without a virtuous education of the youth, because an untaught youth in this generation will result in a rebellious generation in the next. And what has happened, I think, in this country is that we have failed to teach the youth the essential elements that include these basic principles. They may know how to add and subtract if they do, and they don't even know how to do that. But they don't understand the most important elements that lay down the foundation for maintaining the freedom that allows us to gather here tonight. But then the last thing is, as Penn understands, is understand the need for prayer. And that's why he prayed that prayer. And that's why prayers are written on all over our buildings in government, because it was critical. And as we know, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. And you can find that written on the walls in Capitol buildings. So it's critical that these essential elements are there. And I told them, these are the 10 principles to understand. If you deal with these 10, and you establish your vision, and you understand what your goal is, self-government under God, if you understand these things and you purposely deal with them, you can establish a government, if God so will, that will be free. Now, upon conclusion, and I'm not going to go through all that, but upon conclusion, all of those who were gathered there, the pastoral leaders and the government leaders, took and put together a resolution, a 14-point resolution, which they started out by saying, we, the participants of the International Leadership Summit, heads and ministers of Christian churches, public figures, politicians, men of science, representatives of educational sphere and culture, mass media from the Ukraine and the USA, having constructively and thoroughly discussed the role of Christian values in the development of Ukraine at the new social political stage, have arrived at important and practical conclusions and recommendations, which in our opinion have a fateful character for the future of Ukraine. And then goes on and they talk about things and they lay out 14 principles that they picked up from the presentation of what we did, and they directed this to the Speaker of Parliament and to the new President, Poroshenko. The President's response upon getting that was to take and appoint the lead pastor that was there to a new committee that he established out of his office that he entitles the Spiritual Restoration Committee, and appointed the pastor as the chair of the committee, and said, this is what we want. They have asked us to come back and now hold constitutional summit. And if God holds off the war in Russia and Ukraine, no one knows. That's why I said, when I said what I said in there, I have no idea what's going to happen to Ukraine. I have no idea where America is going to be in 10 years from now. But I do know what we need to do. So if you do the right thing, then you can say, we've done our best, and God allowed what he wanted to happen. So our fellow is back there and has been there for 2 weeks. Actually had a meeting with the President himself today. And they have asked us to help them in the formulation, teaching, and writing of their new Constitution. Wow. To follow through on this. You recognize the name Walesa?
Yeah.
From Poland? He will be a speaker at our summit when we hold it. They view him as a very great leader because he was in what he did there. But he understands these principles and he applies them. So there's a lot that's underway. It's up in the air because we don't know exactly what's happening there. But I will also share that we have been contacted. Again, we have not asked for it, it's just come to us. I've been interfacing with pastors, native pastors in Kenya, in Zambia, in Uganda, who have contacted us, have said, we, just like these guys did, would you come and teach us how to put together a government that does the very same thing? And I have taken this invitation, which I read to you, that came to us from Ukraine, and I have sent it to them over there in these different countries in Africa, and said, this is what just happened in Ukraine. And they've taken and passed us all around with their people over there. And they're as excited as can be. This is what we want. This speaks for us. I don't know where it does go. We're going to respond if we can. I don't, we need financial partners to come along to make it possible. You say, what value is that over there when we're falling apart here? Well, a major emphasis is ours is starting state chapters of pastors across this country so that we have more people standing up in the pulpits where they ought to be, speaking the truth and leading like they ought to be, like is being demonstrated in Ukraine.
Yes.
Like was done here at the beginning of this country. So we're pushing hard here. We're also looking over there. And as I share with guys in Congress, and we have talked with them, some, and pastors here, when they find this out, they say, really? I can't believe it. And I say, isn't it interesting that the nation that was the hope for the rest of the world now may just have their hope given by the rest of the world? Mm-hmm. Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
To have something so strongly and effectively to despise it, to walk away, when others are looking and saying, if America goes down, there is no one for us to look to. We have a big duty before us. We're all concerned, that's why we're here. they're not nearly enough concerned. Probably 10% of the pulpits in America will preach and teach about these principles. These things that you've heard here tonight, these basic principles, where'd they come from? Bible. I did a press release last week that went across the country. I did perhaps more interview on radio and print, almost anything, and it was a recent survey by George Barna that says that 85% of pastors believe that the Bible contains instruction on nearly every issue of life, but only 10% of it will preach it. If you know the truth and you withhold the truth, you know what happens. And this is what's happening. Oh, for fear, controversy, but my land, the challenges to our freedom are so real. They're before us right now. And I say, American people, are we going to have to lose a city? Are we going to have to lose our freedom? And I guarantee the next issue that's going to happen here is not going to be a couple of buildings in New York by a few terrorists and planes. Far more. Is it going to take that? I hope not. I'll conclude with this. I'm going to try to find something here. This morning, this individual, our pastor friend who was over here, who's with us, I asked him to do a little man on the street update. This was this morning in the square in Ukraine. And you listen to this. There's only 2 minutes, and it'll conclude. It wraps up, I think, appropriately where they are right now in application to us.
Hi, I'm Dale Armstrong with the American Pastors Network, coming to you from Kiev, Ukraine. Behind me is a demonstration that's just now beginning to take place on the streets of downtown Kiev. This is Kreshchatik. In the background, you see one of the office buildings for the government. They've stopped traffic. This is how the riots have begun. Things are turning sour very quickly here with the prolonged war against Russia and invasion actually taking place today. Really would ask you to stand and pray with us for this great nation that's in such turmoil. The dissatisfaction of the past and the dissatisfaction of solutions continues to bring such a high level of frustration. The people want freedom, they want liberty, they want to be represented by their government, not controlled by their government. It's really a great day in some ways, and in others, fearful things upon the horizon. So I ask you for stability in the existing government. Please pray for President Poroshenko. I just received a phone call moments ago. I may be summoned to the President's office shortly. I'm waiting for that call. They are asking the American Pastors Network to speak on their behalf to American churches and congressmen and senators and try to move America from its apathy to stand up and take notice of Putin's aggression and the war machine that is accelerating across the Ukrainian borders. The casualties and the losses continue to amount every day. And it's not localized only for this nation, but we need to recognize how it affects Europe, how it affects the economies of the world, how it affects the free people of the world, and how ultimately it will affect America. Again, I'm asking you to pray for these points. Pray, number one, for our influence among the pastors here, that they take their place, for the President Poroshenko, for the stability of the government to really take hold and find traction, and for the people to raise up a new generation of leaders here in Ukraine. Thank you for praying. We appreciate it so very, very much. God bless you. Remember, Jesus is Lord.
So we'll conclude with that, because that's about as updated as you're going to get. They know who their enemy is because they're on the border. We, unfortunately, are not sometimes wise enough to know who our enemy of freedom is, because we've failed to teach the truth for a long time. But the challenge before us is there. This is what's happened in Ukraine. This is where it is. I hope that this was a bit of encouragement, information probably you did not know. But understand, the world is small. Our needs, our wants, are the same like every freedom-loving person around the world. What we have wasn't an accident. Carefully considered. God blessed. For them, they want that. Don't know if they're going to get it. But if they're not, they're going to go down fighting hard and attempting to it. And they're willing to die for their freedom, but they're on the right track. You know, I sometimes say, are we willing, we love enough what we have to be willing to die for it? We may be called upon to do that, you know that.
Whose brain Abby someone? Abby someone. Abby who? Abby normal.